Like
Do
a
we
number
really
one,
have to
maybe?
narrow it down? There's a lot that's worrying me as a woman, as a mother, and not just that, but as a human being, what we value. And I feel very grateful, on the other hand, that we are all becoming so much more conscious, and we're becoming so much more involved, and we're becoming active. And I feel like there's an awakening that's happened.
Hey, besties, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. I think I just won because an order came down into court about Blake Lively, and she does not have the ability to subpoena anyone else at this point because a new order by the court makes clear that document production for subpoenas must be no later than July 25th. So production for any subpoenas must be completed no later than July 25th. Under federal court proceedings, you are not allowed, or they get 2 weeks to even respond to a subpoena about whether or not they're going to comply or if they're going to object. So she can't subpoena anyone else at this point. She can't harass anyone else at this point. And thus far, there has been no motions to quash by the three creators that she has targeted, Perez, Candace, and Andy Signor, but she might not get what she wants. And the judge said that any motions to compel must be done by August 1st. And he said that they need to respond by July 11th as to why this order should not be put through. So they were fighting about a timeline to extend discovery, right? And Blake sent in a bunch of documents trying to claim that, they're being difficult. And Wayfair sent in a bunch of documents and said they were being difficult. And Blake claimed that her deposition was done on July 17th, or was going to be done on July 17th. And her attorneys today, and they basically had to tell the judge that Brian Friedman is a big fat liar and he's lying about her all the time and he can't stop lying about her, and that she's ready and willing to go to take her deposition. And then they shared an email that had some stuff from Blake's attorneys telling them, hey, the audio files are missing on the film, the footage that you sent, and we need to be able to read all of this, watch all this footage before we get her prepared for the deposition. And we're going to do the deposition in our offices for her security reasons. And then they attached a 400-page motion for sanctions or something against Brian Friedman in a separate case for Vin Diesel, where he's being sued for sexual harassment of an employee, a former employee. And they brought this all up in a letter that was a leave to file, meaning they were responding to something about the case management. So her deposition discussions is not relevant to this motion, and her amended, like, changing the schedule has nothing to do with where her deposition will be, right? And for whatever reason, they have to like bring up all the good stuff that she's done. She's the one that's brought in all these documents. She's the one that wants to sit for the deposition. She can't even watch the film stuff because there's no audio. And then after that, they have to talk about how Brian Friedman is so dangerous and not safe for Blake Lively that she needs to go to the offices and have the deposition at the offices of her attorneys, not at the offices of the people that are deposing her. And usually, the people that are deposing will generally get to set where the deposition takes place. So if you are being deposed by the opposing counsel, they generally will have you come to their office and you'll do the deposition there. And generally speaking, most depositions are done with your attorney there with you. So it shouldn't get too hostile. And on top of that, unless they're asking for an exception because she can't go there, like I need to do it remotely, It just seems a little bit odd. They add all of this stuff to sort of paint him difficult, which gets completely ignored by the judge, by the way. There's a footnote here. It says, in the correspondence, the Wayfair parties also refused to agree that Miss Lively's deposition be held at her counsel's office to ensure the appropriate security measures would be in place under the supervision of her counsel. This is particularly concerning given the high profile nature of this case, the substantial public media interest, Miss Lively's right to personal safety, and the protections of the court's protective order, especially in light of Mr. Freeman's previous threats to live stream and sell tickets to Miss Lively's deposition, which was hyperbolic. A- And detailed in recent filings, there's these allegations in Los Angeles Superior Court of unprofessional and physically aggressive deposition tactics by Mr. Friedman. And then they attached 400 pages of a motion for sanctions in that case, which the judge completely ignored. And then the allegation is filed in this lawsuit, and they're trying to say that Vin Diesel is avoiding his deposition and he's trying not to be deposed. And apparently they went to the offices of Brian's office in California with some of their clients. And the attorney of the plaintiff claims that Brian got into the face of one of the attorneys and threatened to punch him and screamed at him and like cursed and said that it was unprofessional and misconduct. So they want them to do a sanctions along with getting Vin Diesel to do his deposition. Now, Brian Friedman's office or someone told TMZ that it wasn't true and that they accused the other attorney of the plaintiff being the one that was yelling and screaming in their face and the one that was getting hostile. And they said that if anything like that had happened, the attorney would have taken out a restraining order against Brian, and they did not. So who knows what happened? And Blake wants to have it at her office. And I'm trying to imagine Brian getting yelling like that and screaming. And I don't know if I could see that. I have honestly no idea. But regardless, Blake's deposition would be at Meester and Schuster's office in New York, which is not Brian's office. And it's Mitchell Schuster's office. And that's where Kevin Fritz is. So it doesn't sound like the situation would be the same. And I'm wondering if these offices have cameras, if any of that can be verified. But who knows what happens behind closed doors. And regardless, just to be clear, the judge ignored that whole issue about the deposition. And instead, he just did an order and said, listen, this is what you guys have said. This is what they've said. Why shouldn't it just be this? We'll finish document production on the 25th. You have to do all of your depositions by the September 30th. And the deadline for discovery being over would be in the end of September. So you have until July 11th to decide if this will be in order. And if you want to oppose it, you have until July 11th to tell me why this shouldn't be in order. So he didn't even address her whole bit about the behavior of Brian Friedman in his depositions. Disputes during discovery and heated confrontations between lawyers does happen, I'll be clear. And there can be definitely situations that escalate. When it comes to this case, her attorneys, no matter what happens, they run to the court and they play the victim and they act like they're being persecuted and it's the worst thing ever. And honestly, what we're seeing in this case is just so atypical to me on a lot of levels. I saw a recent report that this this like UK tabloid journalist named Rod Schuster, who has all of these quote unquote sources, and I don't know who his sources would be. He's claiming that Ryan is banned from the deposition so that he doesn't distract Blake while she's being deposed. Now, there's a protective order in this lawsuit, so I find it extremely unlikely that Ryan would be allowed to attend the deposition anyway, because the depositions are under are part of the protective order that was placed back in March. And when the judge ordered it, as far as he was concerned, the transcripts that come out of the deposition for the first 30 days will be designated at least confidential, if not attorney's eyes only. And because that's that high level of confidentiality, I would suspect they will be limiting who can watch this deposition. And because he's no longer a party to the case, he might be a witness that gets deposed, but he's not being sued anymore. His his presence at the deposition itself could absolutely become problematic, um, if he were to try to interfere in the testimony. When you're doing a deposition, you technically can have your spouse there unless there's a protective order. So there's a protective order in this case. So I would think that it's not so much that they don't want him to distract her, but it's more so that he's not allowed because of the protective order, because they're going to go over confidential information that he, as a non party, isn't allowed to see. It's not hit because he's not being sued anymore. He has no rights to see what the evidence are at this point in time. So that's my take on it. And if they want to frame it, Blake's team, that he's being banned because, Blake is very motivated and she wants to focus and she's going to war, great. But I think the reality is that there's a protective order. Incidentally, I received this message today from a woman whose brother worked as an extra on a movie that Ryan Reynolds was in. Do you remember the movie The Change Up? Okay. I think it was 2012 maybe. She wrote, "My brother was working as an extra in Atlanta for several years after he graduated college. He was an extra on The Change Up. He and several guys were given filming equipment props to get familiar with, instructions given to them from the director for an adult film scene in the movie. While my brother and some of the guys were adjacent to another area, they heard screaming, 'Who are you? What are you doing? Who sent you? Why are you filming me?' All rants and loud screaming. So my brother and the others go to look, and it's Ryan berating a scared extra, kneeling on the ground, playing with a camera, who has his hands up like he's about to get beat up. And they said, Ryan is so paranoid. Never will I watch another one of his movies." So if that happened, that's bananas. It kind of reminds me of the story where Justin said that Ryan was screaming at him and berating him and going off the deep end and about the fat shaming. And then again in January, where he yelled at him about apologizing to Blake for what he perceived Justin had done. I think a lot about this entire situation, and I just wonder how it got this escalated. You know what I mean? Like, I think, what if something would have just been done in the beginning where HR would have gotten involved? Or what if they would have gotten their legal team, Baldoni's side, in so that they were more protected? Or what if they would have brought in like a mediator? I mean, it's just so wild that this entire feud is from a film. It's just wild. And Ryan, if that's how he acts on sets, that's bananas. And maybe that's why they don't want him at the deposition. Because when you're in a deposition, you only talk when you're asked a question, right? And observers are not allowed to speak whatsoever. You're also not supposed to speak to people like in between breaks, and you're supposed to keep to a minimum who you discuss about your testimony, because you don't want someone to influence you or try to alter your testimony, so interfering in your testimony. And so often when you're in a deposition, when you come back from a break, you'll be asked by the opposing party attorney or the court reporter if while you were on break you spoke to anyone. So it's on the record, and then you tell them, "Yes, I spoke to my attorney." And then they might ask you, "Did anyone influence your testimony after you during this break? Did you speak to anyone telling you that you need to say this during your break?" Because they're really looking for to make sure that the testimony is not tampered with because a deposition under oath is considered testimony in a case. And often depositions are given before trial so that testimony given in a deposition can be reviewed to look back at for future testimony that may happen at trial and if there's discrepancies in the testimony. And because it's under oath, you might get people to admit something that if they weren't under oath, they wouldn't admit to because you can't lie. But there's also ways of getting around questions by saying that you don't remember or you can't recall. And so my gut here is that if Ryan has a propensity to maybe want to influence or possibly manipulate Blake to make her remember things or to coach her, because one of the biggest issues with depositions is ensuring that the witnesses aren't coached. And that's hard. I mean, I'm part of a case where there's been people where I believe they've been coached, they've been told what to say, there's been pressure for them to say certain things, even if it's not true. I've watched people lie directly to an attorney in a deposition because they've been coached, and that's hard to prove when you get into court because then you get all these different people that say the exact same things, and so it looks like it's true even if it's not. So that's another way that the process of the depositions can be manipulated, which is often why attorneys limit those people that can be involved in the part of the witness testimony. And Blake is someone that has a very hard time with the truth. So does Ryan. So getting them under oath is pretty big. And I don't think either one of them have ever had to go under oath for anything. I don't think either one of them have ever been involved in a lawsuit where they've had to be deposed, at least that I know of. Nothing publicly. This is like the first lawsuit I know of them being involved in, at least publicly, right? We don't know what happens behind the scenes. But yeah, so Ryan is banned, and I think it's more for the protective order along with his possible influencing her and then his temper. Because if he yells and screams and berates people when things don't go his way, I mean, if I was gonna put my betting on who I would be more afraid of, Brian Friedman or Ryan Reynolds, I would actually go with Ryan Reynolds. I think he's more hot-headed, and I think he's more unpredictable. And I think Blake would probably be safer away from him, but that's just my opinion. My biggest takeaway of all of this today is that Blake and Ryan's reign of terror and abuse of the subpoena process has now been thwarted by a judge, and they don't have this unlimited power over people to intimidate content creators and to intimidate and harass people that are less powerful than them and can't afford to fight them into providing testimony or demanding all of the access and contents of their phone. It ends in 2 weeks. No more. The judge said, no more. No more subpoenas. Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Please make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed and click the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.